two students. This is Bob Jackson. I'm back at you with some biology content this evening. This is week 6 of the SE202 class, and this unit is on ecology. Okay, and this will be the last real unit that we will be in. We'll do ecology 1, and then we'll do ecology 2 next week. Okay, it's just where I'm breaking the content up so it's not too much, okay, in 1 week. Okay, we are also using the LibreText online textbook rather than the regular textbook with this as well, just because I think it's a little bit more appropriate for elementary. Okay, so anyway, if you'll take a look at the PowerPoint, you'll see that it is on ecology. It is ecology, of course, falls within the realm of biology. Okay, if most of you probably took it your freshman year of high school, had some ecology as part of your biology course. Okay, so the main concepts we'll uncover: succession, ecosystems, food chains, food webs, which most of you probably had before, and I think food chains, food webs, probably 4th, 5th grade. Most of you will have had your first experience with, and then some in middle school and then high school biology. Okay, we'll talk about the carbon and nitrogen cycles. We've already talked the hydrologic cycle before the water cycle. And so in this module, we'll talk about the carbon and nitrogen cycles, which are extremely important in the environment to keep a healthy environment and a good balance. Okay, and then we'll go back, in which we've already introduced them before in the introductory biology unit, biomes, and talk just a little bit, not too much, but talk about the major biomes that do exist in the world. And then we'll finish things up with talking some predation, some competition, and symbiotic relationships within ecosystems. And one thing which I don't have on here, we will talk in the biomes, get into talking some aquatic ecosystems and biomes and a little bit of traits of the aquatic environment. Okay, so moving along here. Okay, the first thing I'm talking is types of ecological succession. Okay, succession has always taken place. It is a natural process. Okay, and the thing that you can think of is, if I just suddenly quit mowing my grass and just watch what happens through time, that's succession. Okay, and in a lot of areas and neighborhoods, it's not very, it's more or less frowned upon. Okay, but actually, diversity created by allowing succession to take place is actually best, ecologically speaking. It's just that some of it, when the areas around homes and stuff are all grown up in weeds and shrubs and brush and so forth, people don't like the looks of it so well. Okay, but that is succession. Most of us know what it is. Succession takes place in your garden. Succession takes place in flower gardens up around the house. If you just don't keep them weeded, succession is going to take place. Okay, so we first have primary succession, which we really do not see, okay, for the most part. Primary succession is going to occur on land that no other real life forms have grown on before. So that's why we do not really see it. Okay, but now if you take an area that has been exposed and it never was, like if I took that area back behind me in the mountains and took an area of bedrock, like up on the hills there, and nothing's just granite, and I did whatever to start getting things to grow there, that would be kind of primary succession. If you take bare rock and rock area and get stuff to grow there, then that is primary succession. the most common that we see primary succession on the Earth today is areas where you have volcanic activity. Okay, and lava flows and so forth like that. The lava flows take place like in Hawaii that has so much volcanic activity. Those areas, okay, where you've got newly formed rock material that come up out of the ground through lava and laid over a current ground, that has never had life on it before. So when life starts growing on it very, very, very slowly through time, we call that primary succession, because that land, that material has never had living things living on it before. Okay, so that's a primary place we see it. But it can also occur somewhat in the Midwest when we used to have so much mining. If you take a strip mine and the coal mine's gone down through there and totally stripped away the upper layers of the earth and then left it, which is kind of against the law now because they've got to return things back to normal. And they used to not, because we used to have what we called gob piles and so forth around the old mines. But all that newly exposed ground, then nothing's ever grown on before because it was underground. That's really primary succession. That's what you see in the old coal mine areas. It takes so long for it to grow back. So that's why they've had a lot of restorative work where they have taken and put soils on layers of soil, good soils on those grounds and rehabilitated it. So then you're no longer waiting for primary succession to take place, because secondary succession will take place because you brought good soils in, which gives you the good ecosystem and get vegetation and so forth started. Okay, and they do it like power plants. Whenever they tore power plants down in the Midwest, they'll bring soils and so forth in and cover up where the old coal beds were. Okay, so primary succession occurs only in areas that life never was before. Okay, and this is where you see for primary succession to take place before you even have trees in an area that goes through primary succession. It's hundreds of years down the road because it takes a very, very long time for it to succeed and go through the processes because there were no soils on the ground. Soils are very essential. Okay, so then if you go to secondary succession, that's what we see most of the time. So like if I stop mowing my yard, decide I'm just not going to mow it anymore, and then just watch what happens through time, it's secondary succession. First, you're going to see grasses, tall grasses, and then different kinds of weeds growing in it. Then you start seeing a bunch of little sapling trees. Sapling trees grow up into bigger trees, and you start seeing more species of trees come in through time. Okay, and that's secondary succession. Okay, and looking at this, the one that I didn't mention on the first slide is pioneer species. The very first species that you see succeeding in an area, we call pioneer species. Okay, they're the very first. But you'll see with secondary succession, rather than it taking hundreds of years, in 5 to 10 years, you can see a whole lot of development on an area that's went through secondary succession. Okay, so like if you take a farm field and quit farming it, in less than 10 years, you'll see a bunch of trees on it. Okay, because everything can because the good soil's there, everything can succeed better in those conditions. Okay, so primary succession and secondary succession. Okay, ecosystems, we've already introduced this in earlier units, so we really shouldn't have to spend too much time on it, but ecosystem actually does stand for ecological system. And an ecosystem can be something very, very small, or it can be extremely large. All it is a system of not only living things interacting, but abiotic, non-living factors in there as well. Okay, so it can range from a forest to a pond to even on my skin. Okay, is an ecosystem. You can talk swamps, on mountains, on mountainsides, on the top of a mountain. And you'll see a lot of differences between one place and another. Okay, but ecosystems will always involve the interaction of both living and non-living things and more than one population, and animals as well as plants. Okay. More terms here. Ecology is a study of how living things interact with each other and the environment. Okay, it just somewhere along the way, and I guess I never did really define the term, but ecology is very important today. Abiotic factors are non-living things in the environment. They will include the soils, sunlight, temperature, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, which I don't have on the list here, but it is an important one actually. And then several other different chemicals and minerals and vitamins. Okay, most all animals need vitamins. Okay, these are all abiotic factors. Biotic factors are all the living things, ranging from microscopic protists and bacteria to very large animals and very large trees and types of vegetation. Okay, they are the living things. So two main things in ecosystems. And then you have the niche, or a niche is a role for a given species. Okay, and it includes all the ways that the species interact with the environment, both their biotic and abiotic components. Okay, now then a general rule of thumb, and I think I got it on the next slide, is, maybe I don't, no two organisms can occupy the same niche at the same time, okay, because of competition. Okay, and so that's where we see in the environment that we have different types of birds, we have different types of animals, that they're competing somewhat, but most all of them have different niches. Okay, they have a different role in that ecosystem. Okay, and if there are any that are very, very close on having the same niche, they get in very stern competition, and one can lose out at time, and that has been reasons for animals in the past going extinct. Okay, so here's a way that you can actually see niches, and birds is one of the easiest ways to see it. If you take a look at the bird beaks, different birds and the styles of bird beaks they have, that gives them the ability to have different niches. They feed on different things. Okay, they go about feeding differently. So it's going to put them in different locations than each other. Okay, so like you have insect catching birds, like we see swallows around here. Okay, you can see them eating insects later in the evening or over the top of water. I know I've been boating on water a lot. You see swallows swooping down, getting the insects over the top of the water, but they have these little bitty beaks, most appropriate for eating insects. Okay, they call this a generalist. This is, you see, like crows have. Okay, around here where they eat all kinds of stuff. Okay, here's a surface skimming like these you'll see with water birds, where you'll see they'll be skimming the surface of the water and letting the stuff wash into their beak. Okay, scything, these actually go across, they usually take these across the top of the water. There's one right down here. Okay, but they'll just sit there and just keep it across the top of the water, eating things on the top of the water. Okay, but then you see this guy here with the bill that he's going down, and he can get into clams and so forth under the water. Okay, and down in the water. To ones that you have chiseling like the woodpeckers on trees, hammering away, while they're vibrating that tree and they're getting insects come out of the tree and all about them. Okay, yes.
There's lemon trifle, if you want some.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm making a video right now, so I'll see. That's fine. You're on it now. It'll be okay. Okay, these are nectar, like your hummingbirds. Okay, the hummingbirds will feed on flowers and get the nectar out. Okay, that gives them a different niche. Okay, now of course all these birds here are not in the same environment. Okay, but it's just showing how you can see the niches. To aerial fishing. Okay, scavengers like the vultures you see landing down on the roadkill stuff. Okay, they have a beak for tearing apart all that dead critter on the road. Okay, so you can see the different niches, the different roles of the birds through their beaks. Okay, you can also see like these, most of these I think are warblers. Yeah, which we have the warblers around here. They'll be in different niches by the fact they'll be at different points in the tree. Like this warbler here, the Cape May, will be up towards the top of the tree feeding. And they go up and down. The warblers just typically see them on the trunk of the tree. Okay, whereas a bay-breasted warbler is going to be lower down on the tree. And then like your yellow-rumped warbler is down on the lower part of the tree on the lowest. Okay, so they're separating themselves. They're not eating and preying in the same areas. Okay, so it gives them different niches. And there's all kinds of animals do this. Fish do it too. Okay, and land animals, they do just like a fox and a coyote, have different niches. Okay, they eat different things and they go about eating in different ways. Okay, so that's niches and putting it in easy terms. Okay, habitats. Okay, I think most of us know what habitats are. There's a physical environments in which species live, and each species is adapted typically to their habitat. Like you find a gray fox in the woods. You don't typically find them out in the middle of an open field. Okay, you find raccoons around woodlands, around water, around streams. You don't typically find them away from streams at all. Okay, so the habitat, the animals and plants are suited to their habitats. Okay, a big part of the habitats that makes habitats what they are is the vegetation. Okay, and then the climate, the amount of moisture, and the average annual temperature determines a habitat and what it's going to look like. Okay, which habitats are pretty much one and the same as biomes. Okay, you can intertwine those terms a good bit. Okay, whereas habitats usually talk about it being a home for a species. Okay, so here's the major habitats of North America here. Okay, we have the tundra up north, the boreal forest, which is a good bit of Canada. You have the coastlines and unique species and unique environments along the coastlines around the United States. And there's a pretty big difference between like the East Coast and the West Coast. Okay, temperate forest, which what we are in the Midwest. Okay, where there's forests, the grasslands in Kansas and Nebraska, and up through the Dakotas. Okay, and then tropical highland forest and tropical lowland forest down in here. Okay, and then really what it's not showing here is Florida is subtropical. Okay, I don't like the way that's colored up. Okay, here's some showing Indiana's habitats through time. Okay, which has really changed through time. Back in the 1800s, it was mainly forested, as you see here. And now a good bit of, particularly northern Indiana, is agricultural. A lot of the woodlands have been cleared, and it has made pretty good agricultural land, but we totally changed that environment. Okay, and here's the one that I was talking before. No two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat for very long at all. So it could be just for a short period of time. You call it the competitive exclusion principle. Okay. Now then, flow of energy and ecosystem. This is where we're going to start get into. We'll talk about food chains and food webs. Okay, but before you get into them, you got to get into some of these key terms here. You have producers. Producers are organisms that produce their own food. Most common ones being plants. Okay, they can also be called autotrophs. Auto means self and trophs, food. So they make their own food. Okay, two types of autotrophs are the photoautotrophs and the chemoautotrophs. But a lot of the, most of the time, the chemoautotrophs, you just call them chemotrophs. Okay, But photoautotrophs are our plants, our algae, some bacteria and some protists. Some protists are like more like plants. Okay, they can photosynthesize. Okay, and that's photoautotrophs, photosynthesize. You tie those two terms together. Chemoautotrophs, they live off of chemical compounds. Okay, they don't need the sun. Okay, some of these are bacteria and archaebacteria. Some of them are live in hot springs. Okay, and deep in the ground, and we're finding more and more that live off things like oil. Okay, which is kind of neat. But they're chemotrophs. They feed off chemicals that's either in water or in the soils or wherever. Okay, whereas autotrophs are using sunlight. Okay, they're photosynthesizing. Okay, flow of energy in an ecosystem. Okay, we're still on. Okay, now this is where we're talking consumers. Okay, consumers, there's several different types of them. Okay, and kids like learning about these because it's cool. You get to see the warm fuzzies and the bears, the lions and tigers and the bears, all the big predators. Consumers are organisms that depend on other organisms for food. Okay, they are consuming. Okay, there are some types of consumers. There's 4 basic types. You have herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores are 3 main types, and then you have the decomposers, which can work on all of them. These are the ones that break down organic matter. Okay, if it's a dead critter, decomposers are going to work on it. Okay, which you also get into calling these scavengers, detrivores, and saprotrophs. Okay, whereas I'm telling you here that vultures, like vultures, you see I talked to them before, they're scavengers. Okay, even raccoons can be somewhat scavengers. And then you have detritivores, they're your earthworms, your millipedes, and the dung beetles. These are the ones and larvae of several different types. Okay, and then saprotrophs are fungi and single cell protists. Okay, but now back up here, which I kind of hopped across them. You have herbivores, and most kids get to know this pretty young. Herbivores are plant eaters. Okay, they go, some will eat even algae when you get some of the smaller forms of the consumers. Carnivores are meat eaters. Okay, they eat other animals. And then omnivores eat both. Okay, so some examples of these, like some of our most common omnivores are the bears and the raccoons and some of our lizards. Carnivores are these guys, the wolves, the tigers, the killer whales, even bass around here. Bass are carnivores, big time. Okay, and then our herbivores, rabbits around here and white-tailed deer like crazy. They gobble all kinds of stuff up. And then koala bear there over on the other side of the world. Okay. Food chains and food webs now. Okay. Food chain is where you have just a single pathway. Okay. Like you go from the algae to the krill to the crab to the sea otter, or bunch grass to grasshopper to frog to hawk. That's a food chain. That's a food chain. And then you can break that up and say, there are trophic levels in the food chain here. Primary, you have the primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, where each has a trophic level. Okay. But now then what really exists in the world isn't this, because we know a red-tailed hawk isn't just going to eat just frogs. Okay. If a little sparrow comes flying by and that red-tailed hawk can take it out, it's going to take it out and eat it. Okay. So things aren't as simple. It's just saying we have food chains. We have what we call food webs. That's what's shown here. This hawk can eat snakes. Okay. It can eat frogs. Okay. It's not really showing. It's not got an arrow there, but it will. Okay. It can eat rabbits. Okay. And it will. Okay. And the same thing with this fox. You'll see that it'll eat different things. And then the mice, these guys down here, and the grasshoppers are eating the rabbit, the mouse, and the grasshopper eating the grasses and vegetation. Okay, but we call it a food web. Okay, that actually exists in an ecosystem. Okay, where you have multiple pathways for energy and matter to flow in the ecosystem rather than just one path like a food chain. Okay, so then this is where I was just talking. You have trophic levels in all food chains and food webs. You have the producers, you have the primary consumers, which is the first level consumers. Okay, they're going to be the herbivores. Primary consumers are always herbivores. Then your secondary consumers are eating them. Then your tertiary consumers are at the top level. They're your typically your birds of prey, or even like a bear, okay, or a polar bear, or a brown bear, a grizzly bear, or a whale in the ocean. Okay, they're the upper level. Okay, they can eat all the others. Okay, most tertiary consumers are not. They don't eat vegetation, but there are some that do, like a bear, a black bear will. Okay, so that's what we mean by each of these. You have producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Some will call this a quaternary consumer. Okay. Now, another thing is between each trophic level, the reason we eat to get energy, to keep living. Only about 10% energy passes from one level to the next. Okay. And then biomass, you should talk, this is actually a pyramid that exists. In any given ecosystem, you have a biomass pyramid of all the organisms there, including plants and animals. The one that has to be the largest biomass is always the bottom layer, which is vegetation, like trees and grass and all. If it gets where, like, and this is where you can see like cattle. If you leave cattle in a pasture way too long, they eat it down to nothing. Then there's nothing left, and there's a long time before it ever grows back. Okay, so that's why on the big cattle ranches out west, they rotate the cattle around, and they also have open range in the summertime to get them up on the mountainsides to where they can not overgraze areas. But the biomass always has to be the greatest in the bottom layers of your trophic levels and the least up here. So if you took all the hawks in an area and weighed them, they weigh a whole lot less than all the rabbits. Okay, and it can't exist any other way. Okay, if there's a whole bunch more hawks than there were rabbits, then it wouldn't work for very long because the hawks aren't grabbing enough to eat. Okay. Then our nutrient cycles, we have the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Okay, the carbon cycle is extremely important. All of us, all living things have carbon in them. Okay, in the atmosphere, the main carbon compound we have in the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. And that's where we have this cycle taking place of putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It also leads to the greenhouse effect. Okay, so if you take industries and automobiles, through their exhaust and emissions, put CO2 in the atmosphere. We, animals and us, breathe out carbon dioxide. We're putting it into the atmosphere. Okay, and plants even respire out during the nighttime, mainly CO2 out. But then during the day, our plants are photosynthesizing. That's why we like to have a lot of plants around, because they're taking CO2 out of the air. Okay, they take the carbon dioxide and fix it into sugars inside the plant. That's how the plants grow, part of the process of how they grow. Okay, so plants take CO2 out. Okay, you get some CO2 dissolved in water. Okay, but the biggest amounts being taken through plants. Okay, and then plants get eaten by animals, which takes carbon into the animals, and then eventually animals die and form organic matter that then decomposes and goes back to the soils. Okay, so you have a constant cycle. You even get organic matter taken up by the plants also, not just carbon dioxide out of the air, but some organic matter up to the roots of the tree as nourishment. Okay, or nutrients. Okay, nitrogen cycle, 78% of the air is nitrogen. Okay, lightning strikes, when they go on, they do what we call nitrogen fixation, where they convert the N2 to NO3 and NO2, which returns nitrogen to the soils as nitrates, which is a fertilizer for plants. Okay, And that's where you're going through this ammonification process down here that takes place. This is nitrite, nitrate here, NO2 and NO3. And the plants love this, nitrates particularly. Okay, the bacteria are what help break the nitrogen down, okay, in the soil to the nitrates that plants can use. Okay, but then you're reaching a point where the nitrogen, where you go through what's called denitrification, okay, and you get more nitrogen released to the atmosphere. Okay, so you get nitrogen fixation, you're putting nitrogen back into the soils. Okay, main process is through actually lightning. That's where lightning's good. You also have ammonification where it's like that's a cow there. It's through urine, it's through waste that in which we interfere with this process. Since humans use bathrooms, that urine is taken through an ammonification process to form your nitrates. Okay, and then the nitrates are then going to be converted back to nitrogen and released back to the atmosphere eventually. Okay, so carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle, two very important processes that take place. Nitrogen cycle we like, and we're not having too much problem with. Where we're having a problem today is CO2 and getting too much CO2 built up in the atmospheres around the world. Okay. Okay, Earth's biomes. Here's Earth's main biomes. Okay, which go right along with the habitats. Okay, and you can see the different areas here. You got your tropical rainforest, tropical or temperate rainforest down here. Okay, the deciduous forest that we have here. Okay, in this area, and it used to all be until we cleared a lot of it to our grasslands. Okay, which they call temperate grasslands, and savannas. Savannas are mainly in Africa and South America. Okay, which they're somewhat like a grassland. And then like your tundra and your boreal rainforest. Okay, they're all in there as they are because of the climate that they have. Okay, these are the biomes, of the main biomes of the world. Okay, and then within each of these, you have unique biodiversity within each, which is kind of showing you over here. The biodiversity it can be, like this is in a savanna here. Okay, here's an aquatic environment here. Well, 3 aquatic environments there. Here, this is probably, that looks like that's probably in Montana or Wyoming, and what would be somewhat of a subalpine type area. Okay, that one. Okay, but biodiversity is very, very important. Okay. And then here we're going to get into the aquatic biomes. Okay, your aquatic biomes, the main divisions that you can get in with the aquatic biomes is what you call the photic zone and aphotic zones, usually determined by depth. Okay, once you get over 200 meters deep, particularly in the ocean, you're not having light, so you call it an aphotic zone. Photic is light. Photic zone is how far light penetrates, which most lakes and ponds around here, light will get down through, and we don't see that. Many differences with it, but in the deep oceans and deep lakes like in the Great Lakes, you get into aquatic zones. Okay, water and dissolved nutrients in aquatic biomes, okay, is determined by the characteristics of the water. So water near the surface contains more oxygen than deeper water. Okay, it's just what's taking oxygen in from the atmosphere. The one thing I don't have on there is colder water will hold more oxygen, warm water. So if you get water up well above 80 degrees, you get it to where it doesn't hold much oxygen, so you don't see many fish there. And that's where some good bass fishermen carry around O2 meters with them, because if the O2 is down on a hot summer day, they're not going to bass fish there, but there's not going to be very many fish there. Okay, and then water near the shore has a lot more dissolved nutrients. So that's why a lot of times them fish hang out not only up there for shade, but there's a lot more nutrients available up there, particularly if there's a stream coming in. Okay, and then water near the bottom has a lot more decomposers and detritus type material. So that's where like some of your catfish and stuff like that live. Okay, so there are different environments with the depth of the water. Okay. Now then, wetlands. Wetlands, which we have some around here in Indiana, has had a huge wetland initiative project, particularly along the Wabash River over the last decade or so, where they've been putting a lot of money into putting farm ground back to wetlands along the Wabash River from, well, all the way up north down towards Vincennes and southward. Okay, but wetlands are saturated with water for at least one whole season each year. They help in the fact that they can store water and help with flooding in other areas. Okay, in other words, if we didn't let it be a wetland, we always wanted the water gone from there, then that water's pushed someplace else. Okay, so they store excess water. They slow down runoff and prevent erosion. That's a big factor for farmers and getting them convinced of it, that they're better off keeping that wetland because it can help save their land on upstream. Okay, they remove excess nutrients from runoff before it goes into the river. Okay, so that's also sediments. And they provide a unique habitat that provides a biodiversity out of this world. You take any of you around Terre Haute, the grade between West Terre Haute and Terre Haute has a whole lot of biodiversity with being a wetland. And it's a good portion of each year. And with that, you see particularly different types of birds, but there's turtles and there's frogs and there's all kinds of different turtles actually. Okay, but they provide a safe, lush habitat for many species. There's also out east of Terre Haute, the J.I. Case Wetlands. It's also a pretty neat place that we're getting all kinds of birds coming in there. Even seen some swans and some pelicans here in the last few years out of the J.I. Case Wetlands. That's what wetlands are good for, is bringing in all kinds of biodiversity and birds more than anything. Birds and plants. That's where you see them getting really grown up with different types of plants through time. Okay. And then other ecological concepts that really ought to hit are predator-prey population dynamics. I can't emphasize it enough that even though people don't like to say it and like they want rid of wolves and stuff like that, those top level predators are needed to keep populations in check. That is what has saved Yellowstone, or the wolves in Yellowstone. Okay, and that's just like back in time when you hardly ever see any bobcats in Indiana. Now there's a lot of bobcats in Indiana and they're good. Okay, because they keep the rest of the populations in check, including rabbits. Otherwise, they're eating everything up on you. Okay, and then there's keystone species. You'll find in different areas, there are what you call keystone species. If you remove that one species, it totally changes that ecosystem. And the one most studied keystone species that I know are Yellowstone wolves. Okay, they are a keystone species, and like I say, they have saved Yellowstone. But it can be different. It can be a different species in different areas. Like in a lake or a pond, a keystone species could be a type of fish in that pond. Okay, but it can be unique to given areas. Okay, and I've got some keystone species down here at the bottom. You got, like I say, the wolf, particularly for Yellowstone. Grizzly bears in areas in which we've lost a lot of grizzly bears. Used to be, well, anymore you don't see too many grizzly bears except in Montana and northwestern Wyoming, and then Alaska, of course. Sea otters and beavers. Beavers can be keystone species, particularly in wetlands. Okay, and then sea stars in around coral reefs, and even actually in Alaska in places. Okay, because they keep in check a lot of freshwater clams and stuff like that. Okay, and I think that ends up this PowerPoint. So if you have questions or comments or need help, let me know. Thank you.